All right, Guardians. Today's deep dive is going to be right up your alley. We're diving deep into a document that's basically your playbook, the Space Capstone Publication. We're going to break down exactly what current U.S. Space Force doctrine is all about. And trust me, this is not some boring old military manual.
No, not at all. This stuff is fascinating. And it grabs your attention right from the start.
What do you mean?
Well, it compares war to, get this, both an art and a science. It even says that war challenges people to their very core.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
It's like they're leading with the human element, which is kind of surprising for a document about space, right?
Yeah, and that's a common thread throughout the entire thing. One of the biggest takeaways is that the U.S. Space Force considers its people, you Guardians listening, as America's greatest space asset. It's not just about having cool tech, it's about having the knowledge and expertise to use it right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You could have the most advanced, spaceship in the world, but without a skilled crew, it's not going anywhere.
Exactly, and the publication really stresses the importance of innovation to keep the U.S. ahead in space. It argues that just having money or doing some reorg isn't going to cut it.
So where does real innovation come from then?
Well, they say it comes from the people on the ground doing the work, their vision and dedication.
It's like they're saying, we, the U.S. Space Force, value your expertise, Guardians. You're not just cogs in the machine. We need your creativity.
Exactly. And that actually leads perfectly into the next big idea, the space power mentality.
So this mentality, it's not just for those wearing the uniform.
Right. It's much bigger than that. The publication makes it very clear that this applies to everyone, the scientists, the engineers, the analysts, literally everyone involved in space.
Okay, so it's all about protecting U.S. interests in space. But then there's this phrase that kind of threw me for a loop, the control and exploitation of the space domain. What does that even mean, practically for you Guardians?
That's a great question. And it gets to the heart of what it means to be a space warfighter. They're making it clear that the Space Force doesn't just observe space, it actively shapes it.
So it's more than just, knowing how to operate a satellite. It's about understanding how to use that satellite strategically to achieve military goals.
You got it. They actually say that a warfighting culture is the defining difference between operating space-based information systems and employing credible military space power.
Wow. It's fascinating that they're emphasizing this duality, mastering the art of warfare while dealing with all the complexities of space.
Mhm.
For our listeners in the U.S. Space Force, what does this duality mean for their training development? What kind of mindset do you need for this new type of warfare?
Those are all excellent questions, and luckily for us, the Space Capstone publication gives us a framework for understanding that. It outlines what it calls the 7 space power disciplines.
7 disciplines is kind of like, some ancient martial art, but for space.
I like that. And yeah, in a way, that's a good comparison. These disciplines are the foundational skills and knowledge areas that make up everything the U.S. Space Force does.
Okay, I'm getting that it's more than just having really cool rockets and satellites. It's about how to use space power effectively.
Yeah.
Give us the rundown. What are these 7 disciplines?
So we've got orbital warfare, space electromagnetic warfare. Those sound like they're straight out of Star Wars, right?
Yeah, those are the ones I want to hear about.
Of course. Then there's space battle management. That's all about command and control in space, like air traffic control, but way more complex and higher stakes, obviously.
How about?
What else we got?
Okay, so there's intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, which obviously that's critical for understanding the space environment and threats. Then there's space access and sustainment, which is all about launching and keeping those space assets up and running.
So it's not all lasers and battles up there. You need logistics and all that behind-the-scenes work, too. Oh, yeah, for sure. And it's all connected. And we have engineering and acquisition for developing new space systems. And lastly, military intelligence support to space operations. So basically, making sure those space missions have the intel they need.
Man, that's a lot to keep track of. I can already see how these disciplines all work together. But let's break down a couple of them. Take, for example, orbital warfare. What's that all about?
Okay, so picture a giant chessboard, but instead of squares, you have orbits, and instead of chess pieces, you have satellites and spacecraft all moving around trying to get a better position than the enemy.
So, positioning is key. You got to anticipate the enemy's moves and counter them.
That's the idea. It's about mastering orbital mechanics, knowing how to maneuver, knowing your weapon systems, all while trying to outsmart your opponent.
That is really wild. Okay, what about space, electromagnetic warfare?
All right, so you know how important the electromagnetic spectrum is here on Earth, communications and all that? Well, it's crucial in space, too.
Hold on. You're saying we're fighting over the electromagnetic spectrum?
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's all about controlling it, jamming enemy comms, protecting our own, and even using it for intelligence gathering.
So basically, whoever controls the electromagnetic spectrum controls the information flow,
Mm-hmm.
and that gives them a huge advantage.
Exactly. And here's the thing. These disciplines often work hand in hand. Imagine jamming an adversary's communications with space electromagnetic warfare while also pulling off some orbital warfare move to get a better position. That's what makes space power so complex and exciting.
This makes me think about all our listeners in the Space Force. Let's say they're working on a specific project. Maybe they're not even directly involved in, like, orbital warfare. How can understanding these disciplines impact their work?
Oh, that's a great point. Even if you're not flying a spaceship, understanding the bigger picture of space power and how your job fits into that is huge. Let's say you're working logistics or even in a support role. Understanding how your work contributes to, say, space access and sustainment and how that impacts the overall mission is really important.
Right, because it's all connected in the end.
Exactly. And that's where the Space Capstone Publication's focus on studying military history comes in. By looking at how battles have played out in the past, we get valuable insights into the nature of warfare.
So we're moving from the science of space to the art of space warfare.
Mm.
And the publication says it's important for you Guardians to study military history. It even says to study it in breadth, depth, and context.
Right.
But, and maybe it's just me, how much history can there be about space warfare? It's a pretty new thing, right?
You're right, it thinks a new frontier, and the publication actually acknowledges that. It's saying to look at military history broadly, going way back, to understand what's constant in warfare and how tech changes things.
So even though the technology is different now, some core principles of warfare, or even just how people react under pressure, that stuff stays the same.
Exactly. Think about battles like Thermopylae. Tiny Spartan force holding off a huge Persian army. That teaches us about strategy, using your resources, even the psychology of defending a choke point. Now, that was on land centuries ago. But those ideas, still relevant for the Space Force today, thinking about how to defend key orbits.
It's wild how those old strategies still apply in space, centuries later.
That's why history matters. It gives you that deeper understanding, not just how to use a weapon system, but the human side of things, decision-making, the chaos of battle, how to adapt when things go wrong.
Learning from the past so we don't repeat mistakes, right?
Absolutely. And that's where studying in context is important. The publication says you got to understand the politics, the social stuff, even culture, to really get why conflicts happen.
So it's not enough to just study the battles themselves. You got to understand the why behind them, what was going on back then.
Right.
Hmm.
Take the Cold War space race. It wasn't just about getting to the moon first, right? It was this huge display of power, ideology, all that. Understanding that helps us see why decisions were made back then. And there are definitely some parallels to how things are today.
That's a really good point. And speaking of understanding context, the Space Capstone publication is big on leadership. There's a whole section on it. It basically says the future of space power depends on good leaders, leaders who are more than just tech experts.
Exactly. It talks about this balancing act that Space Force leaders have to do. You got to focus on today's mission, making sure things run smoothly, but also prepare for tomorrow's challenges, make sure your people are ready for anything.
It's a tough job. You got to be able to pivot, think on your feet, be adaptable, all while leading a team.
And the publication is really big on building resilient teams. It stresses being agile, encouraging new ideas, even accepting some risk. It wants leaders to empower their teams, create an environment where it's okay to learn from mistakes.
So build that space power mentality we talked about,
Yeah.
but in a way that lets each Guardian use their skills to the fullest.
Exactly. And I think that's a great takeaway for everyone listening, no matter what your role is in the Space Force. New recruit, seasoned officer, you're shaping the future of space power.
Well said. So Guardians, remember, the Space Capstone publication, it's not just some document on a shelf. It's a roadmap, a guide for where the U.S. Space Force is going. It challenges us to think differently about warfare, about space, and about the role we all play in defending this new frontier.
And at the end of the day, the future of space power relies not just on rockets and satellites, but on the people of the U.S. Space Force, your courage and your dedication. Keep learning, keep innovating, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in this amazing domain.